My name is Harold S. Miller. I am 76 years old. I live alone in a quiet sun-bleached neighborhood on the outskirts of St. Louis, in a house that used to echo with life, laughter, and voices I can no longer call by name without a sharp twist in my chest. 6 years ago, I lost my wife, Meredith, to a heart attack in the middle of our kitchen. She was reaching for the cranberry sauce, her famous cranberry sauce, and she just collapsed. One moment she was humming along to a Christmas commercial playing on the radio, and the next she was gone, sprawled across the tiles in a heap of silence that has never quite left this house. I remember the sound the spoon made when it hit the floor. I remember the smell of turkey in the oven and the panic in my own voice when I called 911. But most of all, I remember Jacob, my grandson, laughing upstairs at a YouTube video, oblivious to the fact that his grandmother was dying just a few feet below him. Thanksgiving has never been the same since. That day used to mean something. Meredith would spend days preparing, roasting chestnuts, baking pies, ironing the tablecloth we only used once a year. She believed in tradition, in reverence, in family. I suppose I did too, but it was her who held the glue. After she passed, the glue dried, cracked, and fell apart. That was the last Thanksgiving anyone stayed past dessert. The year after, my daughter came for 40 minutes. The year after that, just a phone call. Then nothing. And yet I keep the ritual alive. I still cook. I still set the table. I still place Meredith's photo in her usual spot. I don't know if it's habit or desperation, maybe both. I like to think I'm preserving something, but some days it feels more like I'm embalming a corpse that no one wants to bury. Jacob used to be the light of my life. When he was little, he'd sit on my lap and beg me to read him stories about cowboys. He once called me Sheriff Grandpa. I kept that nickname in my heart like a secret badge of honor. When his parents were busy, always rushing, I was the one who took him to baseball practice, to the zoo, to that strange little puppet theater downtown that smelled like wet wood and popcorn. He was a quiet boy, full of curiosity. He once asked me, "Grandpa, do stars die?" I said yes. He asked if people become stars when they die. I said only the good ones. He smiled and said, "Then Grandma will be the biggest star in the sky one day." That was years ago, before his voice dropped, before his eyes turned cold and distant, before his phone became more important than people. I hadn't seen Jacob in over a year when my daughter called and said they'd be coming for Thanksgiving this year. It felt like someone had thrown a rope across the gulf that had grown between us. My heart leapt. I went into full preparation mode, cleaning the silverware, dusting the attic, restarching the napkins Meredith had embroidered with little orange pumpkins. I even bought a new table runner, something with autumn leaves and gold trim, because the old one still had Meredith's faint perfume, and I didn't want them to think I was living in the past, even though I was, entirely. I baked the pies myself this year, 2 apple and 1 pumpkin. The crust came out too hard, but I convinced myself it didn't matter. What mattered was the gathering, the chance to be whole again, even if only for one evening. My daughter, Ellen, has always been efficient, organized, poised, hard to please. She takes after her mother in many ways, but she lacks Meredith's softness. Ellen was a daddy's girl until she turned 17 and realized I wasn't a genius, just a man with a mortgage and thinning hair. We drifted after that. There were no fights, no final words, just the long, slow erosion of affection replaced by polite obligation. Still, I held on. I paid for Jacob's private school tuition. I gave them the down payment for their home in Clayton. I co-signed for Ellen's second car when she said it was for work. I never said no, because fathers aren't supposed to, especially when you know that one day you'll be gone and all they'll have left of you is what you gave them and how you gave it. When they pulled up in front of my house this year, I watched from the living room window. Ellen stepped out first, sleek in her beige coat, heels clicking against the sidewalk like punctuation. Her husband, Tom, came around the car with that disinterested stare he always wore around me, as if I were a piece of inherited furniture they couldn't quite get rid of, but didn't want to use. And then Jacob emerged, taller than I remembered, face sharper, phone already in hand. He didn't look up. I stood there for a moment, heart trembling, watching the three of them walk toward my door like strangers about to inspect a property. Then I opened it, smiled, and said, "Welcome home." The house was warm, filled with the smell of roasted turkey, sage, and a faint hint of lemon polish. I had lit candles. I had turned on soft instrumental music. I even set a place for Meredith quietly without announcing it. No one noticed. They shuffled in, muttered greetings, and went about their business like they were checking items off a list. Ellen asked if I had Wi-Fi. Tom asked about the thermostat. Jacob asked if there was any soda. No one asked how I was. I offered drinks. I tried small talk. I asked Jacob about school. He shrugged. I asked if he was still playing guitar. He said, "That was like years ago." I nodded, pretending not to feel the sting. Ellen scolded him for his tone, but without conviction. Tom looked at his watch and asked what time dinner would be served. I said 6, just like always. No one said they were looking forward to it. No one said they missed me. Still, I clung to hope. Maybe the food would bring us together. Maybe the familiar tastes, the echo of past holidays, would warm their hearts. I had made everything from scratch: mashed potatoes with roasted garlic, sweet potatoes with marshmallows, green bean casserole with crispy onions, even the stuffing Meredith used to make with cranberries and sausage. I pulled the turkey from the oven at exactly 5:45, just like she used to. It was golden, steaming, the skin perfectly crisp. I carved it slowly, reverently, remembering how she used to guide my hands with hers. At 6 sharp, I called them to the table. They sat without ceremony. No one commented on the food. No one said grace. I cleared my throat and began to speak, to offer a memory, a small prayer for Meredith, something to anchor us. But Jacob interrupted me. "Can we just eat?" he said, not looking up from his phone. There was a silence then, one of those deep, cutting silences that feels like a wound being opened. Ellen didn't scold him. Tom cleared his throat as if trying to move things along. I looked at the turkey, at the candles, at the photo of Meredith smiling from her usual place, and I felt something inside me shrink. But I smiled. I nodded. I said, "Of course. Let's eat." And that's how the evening began, the last Thanksgiving I would ever host, though I didn't know it yet. Not truly, not until a moment later, when the thing happened that would break the final thread between me and the family I thought I still had. The knife slipped slightly as I sliced through the breast of the turkey, not because my hands were weak, but because they were suddenly numb, as if some signal had been cut between my heart and my body. It had taken all my energy to hold my composure when Jacob dismissed me with those 4 words, "Can we just eat?" And not because it was rude. Rudeness I could take. I've lived through enough of it in boardrooms, bank lobbies, and hospital waiting rooms, but because it came not from a child, not from some clueless teenager, but from a boy who used to sit beside me on Sunday mornings with orange juice and cartoons and ask me what clouds tasted like. It came from someone who had once called me the strongest man in the world. Now I was barely a presence in his world at all. I tried not to let it show. I served each of them with the same care I used to serve Meredith, first Ellen, then Tom, then Jacob, and finally myself, placing everything just right, even folding the napkins over the silverware again after they'd unfolded them carelessly. I asked if anyone would like wine, and Tom nodded without looking up. I poured. I offered sparkling water, cider, even root beer for Jacob, remembering it was once his favorite. He grunted a vague acknowledgment, but didn't take a sip. The food sat there, untouched, for a few seconds before they began eating without a word, as if we were strangers in a diner who happened to share a table. I tried to break the silence. I always do. I've learned over the years that silence at family dinners is rarely comfortable. It's a symptom, a warning sign, like smoke before the fire. So I started a story, one I hadn't told in years, about the first turkey Meredith and I ever cooked together. We were newlyweds then, in a small apartment with an oven that leaned to one side, and the bird slid out of the roasting pan halfway through and landed directly on the floor. I chuckled as I told it, remembering how we had laughed, how we'd ended up eating Chinese takeout off our wedding china, and calling it the best Thanksgiving we ever had. It was a warm story, harmless, something to soften the edges of the evening. But halfway through, Jacob raised his hand, not in amusement or interest, but like a traffic cop, and said, without a trace of irony, "Why are you telling us this?" The question hit me like a slap. I faltered. I looked around the table, searching for a lifeline, for Ellen to step in to say, "Come on, Jacob," or even just to offer a sympathetic glance. But she kept chewing. Tom drank his wine and avoided eye contact. No one said a word. I swallowed hard, more bitter than food, and said quietly, "I thought it might be nice to share a memory." Jacob shrugged, and I saw his lips twitch, not into a smile, but a smirk. That infuriating teenage expression of disdain that they wear like armor. He leaned back in his chair, still chewing, then picked up his phone and began tapping. I don't know what came over me, but I said gently, "Jacob, would you mind putting the phone down during dinner?" And that, apparently, was the real offense. He slammed his fork down. The sound echoed off the walls like a gunshot. "It's just dinner," he said, almost shouting. "It's not a courtroom, it's not church, and it's not the goddamn 1950s. You don't get to make the rules just because you're old." I froze. The room went dead silent again, but this time it wasn't an awkward pause. It was a rupture. A rift had torn through the fabric of what little remained of our family dynamic, and no one even tried to stitch it shut. Ellen didn't tell him to stop. Tom didn't correct him. No one said anything. And then Jacob, with theatrical calm, picked up a piece of turkey with his fingers, not even bothering with his fork, and said, quietly, almost conversationally, "You want respect so bad? Here." And before I could understand what he meant, before my brain even registered the movement, he brought the greasy, sauce-slick meat to his mouth, chewed once, then spit it out, directly onto his plate, and some of it landed on my shirt. It wasn't much, just a fleck, maybe a bit of sauce, a corner of skin, but it might as well have been a bullet. Time slowed. My fork hovered in mid-air. My eyes went blurry, not from tears, but from disbelief. I looked down at the damp mark on my shirt, a shirt Meredith had given me for our 40th anniversary. I looked at my grandson, the boy I had once held as a baby, who was now wiping his mouth with the back of his hand like he'd just performed a dare. I looked at Ellen, who turned pale but said nothing, and I looked at Tom, who simply reached for the gravy. I stood up slowly. My legs felt like wet paper. I picked up my napkin, dabbed at the spot, and placed it carefully on the table. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaking only slightly. I walked out of the dining room and into the kitchen, gripping the edge of the sink until the numbness passed. The walls were closing in. My breath felt shallow. I could hear their forks and knives clinking again, like nothing had happened, like I wasn't even part of the room anymore. I thought I might cry, but no tears came. Just a deep, cold silence inside me, like the air after snowfall, still, muffled, final. For a long time I stood there, staring at the sink, at the reflection of the dining room lights in the faucet. I felt like a man watching his own life from the outside, like I had somehow slipped out of time and become a ghost in my own home. I thought of Meredith, of how she used to laugh at burnt pie crusts and messy tablecloths, of how she'd scold Jacob gently when he was rude, of how she would have reacted to what just happened. I wanted to believe she'd have taken my side, but part of me wondered, had I let all this rot while pretending I was preserving it? Eventually, I heard footsteps approaching. It was Ellen. She stepped into the kitchen, holding her wine glass like a shield. "Dad," she said, not unkindly but cautiously, like approaching a wounded animal. "He's a teenager. You know how they are. He didn't mean anything by it." I turned to her slowly. "Didn't mean anything," I said, and my voice cracked, truly cracked, like something had split down the middle. "He spit in my face, Ellen." She looked down at her glass. "Not in your face." "Exactly." That was it. That was the moment I knew something inside me had broken cleanly, with no jagged edge left to cling to. I nodded slowly, then sat down on the stool by the counter, suddenly very tired, Ellen stayed for a moment longer, then murmured something about needing to check the pie. She left. I was alone again, surrounded by the smell of food no one cared about, in a house where love had once lived, but now only memory remained. And still, I did not cry. I just stared at the wall, breathing, and began, quietly, methodically, to think. Not about revenge, not yet, but about reality. About the truth I had refused to see until a piece of chewed turkey on my shirt finally made it impossible to ignore. Something had to change. I didn't know it yet, but that stain wasn't just on my clothes. It had marked a turning point in my life, a moment from which there was no return. I didn't return to the table that night. I waited in the kitchen until I heard the scrape of chairs, the low murmur of footsteps, the creak of the stairs, and finally silence. Then, only then, did I go back into the dining room and look at the wreckage. Plates half finished, utensils scattered, wine glasses smudged with fingerprints. My plate had barely been touched. The turkey, once golden and proud, was now congealed, the skin wrinkled like old paper. The candles had burned halfway down, flickering over the empty seats like little sentinels presiding over the death of something sacred. I stood there, frozen, staring at the chair where Jacob had sat, the same chair he used to climb onto as a boy when his legs were still too short to reach the floor, the same one where he once fell asleep with mashed potatoes on his cheek and a plastic dinosaur in his hand. That chair was mine once. Now it belonged to someone I no longer recognized. I didn't bother cleaning up. Not that night. I left everything as it was, the food, the stains, the silverware, the napkins Meredith had embroidered. I turned off the lights and went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and began to undress like a man preparing not for sleep, but for a burial. Sleep didn't come. I lay there with my eyes open, listening to the sounds of the house, the refrigerator humming, the old radiator clicking like a pocket watch winding down, the occasional murmur of voices upstairs. Ellen and Tom had taken the guest room. Jacob, I assumed, was in the room that used to be Meredith's sewing studio. I had converted it into a second bedroom when she passed, more out of habit than necessity. It was the coldest room in the house, both in temperature and in spirit. I imagined Jacob up there now, staring at his phone, scrolling through whatever digital universe meant more to him than the people who raised him. And then I wondered, had he told anyone what he did? Had he laughed about it? Had he already turned it into a joke? Spit in the old man's face at dinner? Epic! I could almost hear the imaginary laughter of his friends, the heart emojis, the snarky comments. Maybe he'd even filmed it. Maybe it was already out there, part of a feed I would never see, mocked by strangers who didn't know my name but would still laugh at my humiliation. The thought turned my stomach. I sat up and walked to the window. It was snowing, lightly. Flakes drifted past the glass like bits of ash. I hadn't noticed the forecast. Meredith used to watch the weather every morning, always with her second cup of coffee. She'd narrate the meteorologist's predictions with mild sarcasm. "Oh, look, Harold, more lies in a suit." And yet, she'd still plan the day around it. I hadn't watched a weather report in years. I hadn't planned much of anything. I realized then how much of my life had become waiting for calls, for letters, for visits, for someone to remember me. It hit me all at once, the pathetic shape of that waiting, like some withered houseplant hoping for rain in a locked room. I wasn't living. I was lingering. The next morning I rose early. Out of habit more than intent, I made coffee the old way, stovetop, with 2 spoonfuls for strength and a pinch of salt, the way Meredith had liked it. I poured it into her favorite mug, the one with the faded cardinal on the handle, and sat at the kitchen table in silence. The house was still quiet. I assumed they were all sleeping in, satisfied with themselves, well-fed and undisturbed. I thought of Jacob's face again, the way he had looked at me after spitting, and it occurred to me that there was no shame in him, not the kind that comes from instinct or memory. Whatever I had been to him, a grandfather, a babysitter, a guardian, was gone. I was just an old man now, maybe worse than old, irrelevant. When they finally came down, it was nearly noon, Tom first, yawning and rubbing his eyes. Then Ellen, dressed impeccably as always, carrying her phone like a compass. Jacob followed, hoodie up, headphones in, eyes glazed. No one said good morning. No one asked how I'd slept. Ellen gave a perfunctory, "Smells like coffee," and Tom asked if there was any milk. I nodded. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I felt like my voice would betray me. Instead, I watched them move around my kitchen like tenants, not guests. Ellen helped herself to a croissant I left out the night before. Jacob poured orange juice, drank 2 sips, and left the rest. Tom asked about the Wi-Fi password. I wrote it down without a word. Eventually, Ellen said, "We should probably head out soon. Traffic gets bad on Sundays." I looked up. "You're leaving today?" I asked. She blinked. "Yes, Dad." "We only planned to stay one night. I told you that on the phone." Maybe she had. Maybe I had forgotten. But in my mind they were staying for the weekend. We used to do that. Meredith would plan activities. We'd decorate the tree together. Jacob used to help me hang the outdoor lights, though he was more interested in the candy canes than the wiring. I thought we'd have time to talk, time to repair, time to remember. But no, just one night, and not even that. Just a few hours, a few bitter, silent hours between insults and leftovers. They packed quickly. Ellen gathered their things with practiced efficiency, folding sweaters, zipping up bags. Tom loaded the car. Jacob sat on the couch with his phone, not offering to help, not even acknowledging me. I stood in the doorway as they prepared to leave, feeling like a bellhop without a tip. Ellen hugged me, briefly. Tom gave a stiff nod. Jacob walked past me without a glance. No goodbye, no thanks. Not even a grunt. Just the shuffle of his sneakers on the floor and the sound of the front door opening and closing. I watched their car pull away from the curb, brake lights flashing like a heartbeat, then nothing. Just snow and silence. I stood there for a long time, holding the door open, cold air creeping in around my feet. The turkey was still in the fridge, the pies untouched. The candles burned to stubs. I closed the door, locked it, went back into the dining room and sat down at the head of the table. I looked around. The house felt smaller now, not in size, but in meaning. Everything had shrunk. The memories, the warmth, the possibility of reconciliation. I looked at the photo of Meredith and whispered, "I tried." And for the first time in 6 years, I felt something close to anger, not at them, but at myself, for believing, for waiting, for thinking that love alone could bring people back. I stood up, cleared the table slowly, and washed every dish with care, as if purging the house of what had happened. I folded the napkins, packed away the tablecloth, put the turkey into freezer bags, labeled them with dates I knew I'd never need. I was done. That night I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the file cabinet in my study, the one where I kept all the important papers, my will, the deed to the house, bank account information. I sat down and looked at each document one by one, taking notes. I realized how much I had left vulnerable. Joint accounts, emergency contacts, power of attorney, things that once made sense when Ellen was still the daughter who called me Daddy with affection instead of irritation. Things that now felt like I'd handed the keys of my life to someone who might one day decide I wasn't fit to have them anymore. I stayed up late that night, drafting letters, making lists, outlining what needed to be changed. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I had finally understood something. I had been preserving a family that no longer existed, feeding a memory that no one else cared to keep alive. I had been alone for a long time. I just hadn't admitted it. And now I was ready to act. I always thought the hardest part of aging would be the body, the stiffness in the knees, the medications with names you can't pronounce. The weight of mornings when you wake up not refreshed, but simply grateful you woke at all. But it isn't the body that breaks you. It's the slow unraveling of identity, the realization that the role you once played in others' lives has been quietly retired, written out of the script without ceremony or farewell. It happens in silence, in the empty chairs, in the long spaces between phone calls, in the way people begin talking about you in the third person, even when you're in the room. That's what Ellen and Jacob had done to me for years. They hadn't yelled. They hadn't disowned me. They had simply forgotten who I was to them, and that, I believe, is the cruelest kind of abandonment, the kind that doesn't come with an explosion but with a shrug. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I sat at my desk with a legal pad and a black pen. Outside the window, snow had blanketed the neighborhood in clean white silence. I stared at the page, unsure of how to begin. My lawyer's name came first, then my bank's, then the names of the institutions where I still had small accounts, life insurance, savings, a modest investment fund that Meredith had set up decades ago and I'd forgotten to cancel. I made a list of everything Ellen had access to. I didn't feel rage while I wrote. What I felt was clarity. This wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting myself. I had always believed that family came before paperwork, that love could shield you from greed, but love without boundaries is just an invitation to be used, and I had been complicit in my own devaluation for far too long. By Wednesday, I had appointments lined up with the bank, with a new lawyer, and with a notary public. I called them myself, which took some effort. My hearing isn't what it used to be, and I hate those phone menus where a recorded voice insists you press 1 for services that never apply. But I persisted. At the bank, I sat with a young woman named Amanda, who looked no older than 25. She smiled with practiced politeness and said, "Of course, Mr. Miller, we can remove your daughter as co-signer. You just need to confirm a few security questions." I did. I knew every answer. My memory, though slower now, is intact. Better than Jacob's, I suspect, if it came down to anything that didn't involve an app. Amanda clicked through screens, printed forms, slid them across the table with a plastic pen. "You'll just sign here and here." When it was done, she said, "All set. No one but you has access now." I nodded and thanked her. She asked if I needed help to my car. I told her no. I still walk on my own, and I planned to keep it that way as long as I could. That afternoon I found myself standing in the guest room, the one they'd stayed in for less than 24 hours. The bed was still slightly rumpled. A single sock remained on the floor, probably Jacob's. I picked it up and dropped it into the trash. I looked at the space, silent, airless, temporary. That's what I had become to them. A stopover, a layover, a detour between real destinations, not a home, not a presence, just a placeholder. I closed the door and didn't open it again. That night I made myself a simple dinner, canned soup, toast, a pear. I sat at the table, not in my usual chair, but in the one Jacob had used. I stared at the empty place in front of me. I tried to imagine him there, older, maybe 25, 30, visiting with his own child. Would he look me in the eye then? Would he remember what he did? Or would he laugh about it? Would it become a funny story, a memory sanded down to humor with all the cruelty rubbed out? I found myself shaking my head, not in anger, but in disbelief at my own naivety. I had been waiting for something that was never coming. Reconciliation, remorse, an apology that would never be spoken because in their minds there had been no crime. And then, on Thursday evening, I received a text message. It was from Ellen. Just one line. "Hope you're doing okay. Let us know if you need anything." I stared at it for a long time. There was no mention of Thanksgiving, no mention of Jacob's behavior, no acknowledgement of the silence that followed. Just a bland antiseptic line that felt like it had been copied from a greeting card or an HR email. I didn't respond, not because I was punishing her, but because I didn't believe in pretending anymore. I had spent too many years pretending things were fine when they weren't, nodding along when I was dismissed, smiling through humiliation because I didn't want to seem ungrateful. But I wasn't ungrateful. I had just been afraid that if I spoke up they would disappear completely. Now I realized they already had. The people I missed weren't the people who had just been in my house. They were shadows of the past, memories wearing familiar faces. That weekend I opened an old metal box that Meredith used to keep under the bed. It held letters, photos, some dried flowers from our wedding bouquet. And in it I found something I hadn't seen in years, a letter she'd written me, sealed in an envelope marked, "In case you're ever alone." My hands shook as I opened it. Her handwriting was still neat, slanted, elegant. "If you're reading this," she wrote, "then I'm gone, and if you're reading this when you feel forgotten, please remember, you are not by me, never by me. You gave me a life full of kindness. And if others forget that, it says nothing about you and everything about them. Protect your heart, Harold, and don't be afraid to walk away if the love they offer is only given in exchange for silence." I read it 3 times. I read it aloud. I held it to my chest, and then I cried. Not loud, not dramatically, just quiet, slow tears that fell without effort, not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd almost let myself believe I still had. When I dried my face and folded the letter back into the envelope, I knew what I had to do. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but out of the clear, simple understanding that a man has the right to protect his dignity, I began drafting my next letter, this time not to a bank or a lawyer or a friend, but to my family, not the one I'd hoped for, but the one that was real. I was going to give them a gift they didn't expect, something served not on a plate, but with ink and will and intention. I was going to teach them something about consequence, and I was going to do it in my own time, my own way. They had come to my table and spit on the years I gave them. They thought I would just wipe it off. But what I was about to serve would be the last thing they ever expected. I mailed the letter on a Monday morning, a certified envelope addressed to Ellen and Tom, 1 copy each, carefully worded, calm in tone but precise in meaning. I didn't want emotion clouding the message. I didn't want apologies or explanations or invitations to talk it out over coffee. I wanted clarity. I wrote, "Following recent events and a long period of growing detachment, I've made the decision to reevaluate my estate plans and all associated financial arrangements. This is not an emotional reaction, but a necessary shift in response to how I have been treated and how I have allowed myself to be treated. As of this week, all joint financial accounts have been closed or reassigned. Access to my personal banking and legal affairs has been fully removed from third parties. There will be no further monetary support offered, direct or indirect. I am not your burden. I am not your bank. I am a man who has given far more than he ever demanded in return. That is over now. Consider this letter my last contribution to the fantasy that we are still a family." I signed it without trembling, sealed it, and placed both copies into the mailbox at the corner of Willow and 8th, where Meredith used to mail holiday cards to her. Friends before arthritis made writing painful. It felt symbolic. The gesture of using that same blue metal box, like ending something in the very spot where she had once believed connection was possible. I didn't hear back for 3 days. On the 4th, I got a text from Ellen. "Is this some kind of joke?" I didn't reply. On the 5th day, Tom called. I let it ring. Then he called again and again. I finally answered, not out of curiosity, but to stop the noise. "What the hell is this, Harold?" he said, his voice tight with anger, dressed up as concern. "You're cutting us off after everything we've done for you?" I paused for a moment, then said, "Tell me what that is, Tom. What exactly have you done for me?" The line went quiet for a moment. Then came the classic tactic, the moral leverage. "We invited you to holidays, we took Jacob to visit, we made time for you." I almost laughed, but didn't. 1 visit a year. 1 meal where your sons spit in my face, that's what you call making time. He scoffed, muttered something I didn't catch, then said, "This is about Thanksgiving? Jesus, Harold, grow up. He's 17. "So was I replied, "when I buried my father and took care of my mother. So was I when I worked night shifts and sent money back home. 17 isn't a shield. It's a choice." "You're losing it," he said. "You're old, you're isolated, and you're making decisions that don't make sense. You're not well." There it was, the first attempt. I hung up without a word. That night, I began gathering my medical documents. Not out of fear, but because I could see it coming like a storm cloud on a clear day. I'd seen what families do when there's money involved and the elderly become inconvenient. The narrative always begins the same way: confusion, forgetfulness, poor decisions, vulnerability. I wasn't going to let that story be written for me. I still had my mind, sharper than theirs, if not faster. I still had my memory, every page of it. I remembered the year I took a second job to help Ellen go to private school. I remembered how Meredith and I skipped vacations to help with their mortgage. I remembered the sound of my grandson's laughter when he opened a toy train, said I'd spent 2 weeks researching and ordering from a catalog in Germany, but they remembered none of it. Or rather, they remembered only what was useful. Within a week, a letter arrived from a lawyer representing Ellen and Tom. It was civil, clinical, and as cold as winter asphalt. It raised concerns about Mr. Miller's cognitive health, citing sudden financial decisions, withdrawal of familial contact, and potential risk to his estate through isolation. It requested a voluntary evaluation by a certified geriatric physician and proposed a meeting to discuss guardianship options to protect Mr. Miller's long-term interests. I sat in my armchair reading it twice, 3 times, and then I laughed, not bitterly, not angrily, but with a kind of amazed awe. They were really going to try it. They were going to erase me with paperwork, with the ink and signatures and legal semantics. They were going to steal me from myself, and they thought I wouldn't notice. The next morning I called a lawyer of my own. Her name was Clara Renner, a sharp, composed woman in her 50s with a voice like a gavel and eyes that didn't blink without purpose. I explained everything to her, from the Thanksgiving incident to the letter I'd received. She asked questions, took notes, then looked me dead in the eye and said, "You have every right to make these decisions, but we're going to get ahead of this. We're going to make it hurt for them to keep going." She arranged a full medical and psychological evaluation, independent, notarized, signed by 3 specialists. I passed every test: memory recall, cognitive processing, decision-making capacity. I was declared competent in every sense. Clara filed a formal response to Ellen's letter, including my clean bill of mental health, and warned that any further attempts to establish guardianship without cause would be met with immediate legal retaliation for harassment, emotional abuse, and attempted financial manipulation. But Ellen and Tom weren't done. The next wave came in the form of a surprise visit. One Saturday morning I opened my door, and there they were, standing side by side like a united front, with practiced expressions of concern. Ellen stepped forward. "Dad, we just want to talk." I didn't invite them in. I stood in the doorway and said, "Then talk." Tom sighed. "This isn't good, Harold. You're isolating yourself. You're acting paranoid." "No," I said. "I'm acting informed." "There's a difference." Ellen pulled out her phone, tapped a few times, then held it up. "We talked to Dr. Stein. He said you missed your last checkup. That's not like you." I felt my jaw clench. "You called my doctor?" "We were worried," she said. "You haven't been yourself." "You mean I haven't been obedient?" I replied. "That's not the same thing." Tom folded his arms. "You're being cruel. Jacob's upset. He doesn't even understand why you're acting this way." "He doesn't understand because you've taught him nothing," I said. "You've raised a boy who thinks consequences are optional. I'm just the first person who told him otherwise." Ellen looked like she might cry, but I didn't believe it. I had seen her real tears before, at Meredith's funeral, at the hospital after Jacob was born. Those tears were raw, instinctive. These were calculated, performative tools of persuasion. "We're your family," she said softly. "You're all we have left." I almost answered that they'd made sure I felt like I had nothing left at all. But I didn't. I simply said, "You should go." Before I call Clara. That name made Tom flinch. He'd done his research. They left without another word. A week passed, then 2. I changed my phone number. I contacted every institution where Ellen had ever been listed as a contact and removed her name. I revised my will. I updated my power of attorney. I gave copies to Clara, to my bank, to my doctor, and to my neighbor Robert, a retired judge who agreed to be my emergency contact. I began taking long walks again. I visited the library. I rejoined the American Legion's weekly breakfasts. I felt, for the first time in years, like I was standing on my own 2 feet, not out of stubbornness, but out of strength. And then came the final blow, delivered not with rage, but with desperation. A letter from Jacob. Not an email, not a text, but a handwritten note on lined paper. The handwriting was lazy, uneven, rushed. It read, "Grandpa, I'm sorry if I upset you. I don't really remember everything from that night, but Mom says you've been acting different. I hope you're okay. I miss the old days. Remember when we used to build model planes? That was fun. Anyway, I hope we can see you soon. Happy late Thanksgiving." No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a vague, childlike hope that time itself could erase behavior. I held the letter in my hands for a long time. Then I folded it, placed it in a drawer, and locked it. Because this was not over. They had declared war on my autonomy, on my history, on my right to be the man I had always been, and I was going to finish what they started. I had spent months thinking about what I would do if they pushed further, if they kept knocking at my gates, smiling with rehearsed affection while quietly trying to dismantle the life I'd spent 7 decades building. I had prepared the legal defenses, the documents, the letters. I had locked down every point of access they could twist against me. But what I hadn't done, what I had resisted even considering, was to confront them face to face, not as the silent, patient man they thought I was, but as the one they had buried under layers of politeness and dismissal, the man who still had a spine, the man who remembered everything. On a Tuesday morning in early March, I woke up before dawn, put on my best suit, the same gray wool blend I had worn at Meredith's funeral, at Jacob's baptism, at Ellen's wedding, and I pressed the collar until it sat sharp and clean against my neck. I shaved carefully, I polished my shoes, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee but didn't drink it. I wanted my hands steady. I opened the drawer in my study where I had placed the letter Jacob had written, still folded in its envelope, and slid it into my inside pocket. Not because I planned to return it, but because I wanted to carry the weight of what I was about to do, to feel it on my chest. Then I took a manila folder filled with documents and drove across town to the address Ellen had given me 2 years ago when they moved into their new house in the gated community outside Ladue. I had never been invited there. The house was larger than I'd imagined, all glass and steel and stone, the kind of house that seems like it's trying too hard not to be warm. I parked a few doors down and walked the rest of the way. As I approached the door, I caught my reflection in the glass, an old man, yes, but not broken, not hunched. I rang the bell. I heard footsteps, then Ellen's voice, startled, cautious. "Dad?" I nodded. "Can I come in?" She hesitated. I could see her calculating, glancing over her shoulder, checking whether Tom was home, whether Jacob was upstairs, whether this would turn into something uncomfortable. But eventually she stepped aside. I entered. The house smelled of citrus and chemicals. A robotic vacuum purred quietly in the hallway. The walls were adorned with abstract art, cold lines, and fragmented shapes. She led me into a sitting room, modern and colorless, and gestured for me to sit. I didn't. "Is Tom here?" I asked. She shook her head. "He's at work." "Jacob?" "School." "Good." I placed the folder on the coffee table and said, "This is not a visit. This is a delivery, a reckoning." Her posture stiffened. "Dad, if this is about Thanksgiving again," I held up a hand. "It's not about a single night. It's about everything that followed. Everything that built up to that night and everything you revealed after." She opened her mouth, but I didn't give her the chance to speak. I sat down slowly, deliberately, opened the folder, and slid out the documents one by one. "This," I said, tapping the first page, "is a notarized statement of full financial independence. You no longer have access to any of my accounts. That includes the emergency line of credit you used to draw from without asking. I tapped the next. This is a revised will. You and Jacob are no longer beneficiaries. The house, the savings, the pension, all of it now goes to organizations that helped your mother and I during the hardest times of our life. They remember us. You do not. Her lips parted. I continued. This is a copy of the guardianship attempt you tried to initiate, which I have formally recorded as an act of coercive abuse. It's legally documented now. Should you attempt it again, it becomes actionable. I tapped the final page. This is a letter from your mother. You may read it after I'm gone. It's the only thing in this folder that offers you anything other than consequence. She stared at the papers like they were covered in ash. Her voice, when it came, was thin and shaking. You're cutting us off? You're cutting your grandson off? He cut himself off the day he spat on his legacy. You let him. He's just a child. No, I said, sharper now. He's a man who made a choice. And so did you. I am not obligated to preserve the illusion of family when it exists only in photographs and birthdays you no longer call me on. Her eyes brimmed. But I didn't believe the tears. I had seen too many dry ones. We didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I leaned forward. You didn't care if you did. That's worse. She reached for the documents, but I pulled them back. These stay with me. They're just copies. The originals are filed and safe. I came here to tell you in person, so you'd see my eyes, so you'd hear the truth from my own mouth. You wanted to reduce me to a signature, a condition, a dependent. Now I've made myself undeniable. She looked away, lips tight. What do you want, Dad? An apology? Do you want Jacob to grovel? I stood. I want nothing. That's the point. I wanted for years. I hoped. I waited. Now I require only peace. I walked toward the door. She followed. This isn't how families work. I turned to her. No, Ellen. This is exactly how families work when love is replaced with transaction and memory is used as currency. I taught you loyalty. You gave me paperwork. I gave you my name, my effort, my silence. You used them all. That ledger is closed. I stepped outside. The sun was sharp on the pavement. I didn't look back. Not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because I knew if I turned, I'd soften. I didn't want softness. I wanted truth. I reached my car and opened the door. Before I got in, I looked down at my hand. Steady, warm, alive. That night, I returned home and sat at my kitchen table. I poured a single glass of wine. I opened the envelope in my pocket and read Jacob's letter one last time. Then I took a match, struck it, and set the paper alight. I watched it curl and darken, the handwriting disappearing into smoke. I dropped the ashes into the sink and ran the water until nothing remained. What I had served them that day wasn't revenge, it wasn't cruelty. It was clarity, plated cold and final. For the first time in years, I felt full. It's been 6 months since I last heard their voices, 6 months since I watched my daughter stand frozen in her marble foyer, eyes brimming with something she probably mistook for grief. 6 months since I stood in a stranger's house that used to belong to my blood and told them, finally, that the door had closed. In that time, the house I live in has not changed much. Same walls, same creaks in the floor, same smell of old wood and lemon oil. But something inside it has shifted in a way that is almost imperceptible unless you are the one who wakes up in it every morning. For the first time in years, the silence doesn't press down on me. It breathes with me. It is not a void anymore, but a kind of clarity. I no longer wait for the phone to ring. I don't flinch when the mail arrives. I don't pace past the window hoping to see a car pull into the driveway. The world, as it stands, is smaller now, but in its smallness, I found something I didn't know I was still capable of feeling. Peace. The neighbors have started waving more. Robert comes by once a week with his chessboard and his dry, acerbic sense of humor. We don't speak much about anything personal, but sometimes that's exactly the kind of conversation you need. Clean, structured, no undertones of betrayal or pity. I volunteer twice a week at the local food bank. I drive the truck. My back complains about the lifting, but it's a good kind of pain. The kind that tells you you're still useful. The kind that tells you there are still people out there who need things you can give. I cook again, not like I did for them with anxiety and performance, but simply and honestly. Beans, stews, cornbread, roasted chicken. I eat at my own pace. Sometimes I even put on the old records Meredith loved, not to mourn her, to remember her properly, without distortion. I've received a few more letters from Jacob, 3, to be exact. The handwriting has improved. The tone has not. The first one was defensive, full of qualifiers and the kind of vague remorse that reads like it was written with a dictionary in one hand and a guilty conscience in the other. The second was shorter, more emotional, but still empty of any real acknowledgement. The third simply said, "Are you ever going to talk to us again?" I did not answer any of them. Because what they don't understand, and may never understand, is that forgiveness isn't a door you knock on when it's convenient. It's something earned through humility, through understanding, through time. And sometimes when the damage is deep enough, even that isn't enough. Sometimes the best you can do for both of you is leave the scar alone. Let it be a mark that reminds you, there was pain here once, and it mattered. I'm not angry anymore. That surprised me. I thought anger would be my companion forever, a fire I'd have to keep feeding to stay upright. But once the boundaries were drawn, once the letters were sent, once the final conversation had been had with eyes and spine intact, the fire died down. What was left wasn't revenge or even satisfaction. It was space, room to breathe. Room to remember who I was before I spent all my energy trying to be enough for people who treated me like a placeholder in their lives. I no longer feel like I'm preserving Meredith's memory for someone else. I keep her photo on the mantel now, not on the table. She watches the whole room. I talk to her sometimes, not out of desperation, but out of habit, gentle, grounding habit. I tell her what I've cooked. I tell her when the tomatoes finally ripen. I tell her when I finally get that old watch of mine to work again. I don't ask her what she thinks anymore. I already know. I think she would have done the same if it had been me who died first and her who had to live through the slow erosion of being forgotten. I've made arrangements, not out of fear, but out of order. My final wishes are in place. The house will go to the local veterans shelter. My savings are split between 3 community programs: education, housing, and hospice. I've written letters, not to Ellen, not to Jacob, but to the people who were kind to me when they had no reason to be. The grocery clerk who always asked about my day, the librarian who found Till with me, that book Meredith loved, Clara, who didn't talk to me like I was some confused relic. These are the people who will carry pieces of me forward, not because I owe them, but because I choose to. That, more than anything, is what I've reclaimed. Choice. Not reaction. Not guilt. Choice. Sometimes I walk past the room that used to be Jacob's when he visited as a boy. I don't go in. I've left it exactly as it was, the small bed, the old toy chest, the train poster above the dresser. Not because I'm holding on to hope, but because that room doesn't belong to the man who spit at me. It belongs to the boy who once asked me if stars died. That boy is gone, but the memory of him doesn't have to be. I let it stay, quietly, like a photograph you don't hang, but also don't throw away. A reminder of a time when love was simpler, before it had terms, conditions, and dollar signs attached to it. I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not begging. I'm not bending. I'm not preparing a place at the table that no one intends to sit at. I have made peace with the fact that some families break and do not come back together. That forgiveness is not owed. That respect, once broken, can be withheld without becoming cruelty. I have not become bitter. I have become free. And freedom at this age is the closest thing to justice I will ever need.